Go, sir.
Good evening. My name is Brian Hurley. I'm acting as chairman of the Milton Zoning Board of Appeals this evening. With me are other members, Ted Daber and Michael Brown, and the three of us comprise the board for the purposes of this continued public hearing on the application of 648 Canton Avenue LLC with respect to the combined project at 648 and 652 Canton Avenue in Milton. As many of you know, we have conducted hearings in the past with respect to a project that was presented to us. We came to understand that there was going to be a significant revision to the project and that revision would be presented to Mass Housing Finance and Mass Housing, and that ultimately would come back to us. We agreed originally that we would hope to reconvene on September 7th for a public hearing. Because of the holiday, we were unable to do so. I appeared myself on the 7th and announced the fact that we were going to continue the hearing until this evening, September 14th. We received a number of materials from the applicants, including a memorandum from Embark outlining project and design changes, a drainage report, an auto churn analysis prepared by MDM Transportation, a tabular building and site analysis, an amended list of requested waivers, and some information relating to site control of both 648 Canton Avenue and 652 Canton Avenue. As I mentioned, this project that's currently before us, and which will be the subject of public hearings, reflects a significant reduction. It's a reduction from 204 residential units as originally proposed to 116 units as proposed before us this evening. It's my understanding that the applicant will make a presentation tonight and call upon one or more of its professionals to explain some of the features of the application. I would then expect that we would have questions and commentary from certainly members of the public, council. I know Mr. Corcoran is on the call, and the other interested parties who may have questions or observations about any of the information that's presented as part of this application. So with that preface, I assume Mr. Schomer is on the call.
That is correct.
I'm here.
Yeah. And so, Mr. Schomer, I'd like to turn this over to you for the presentation with respect to this revised plan.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hurley. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Mr. Daber, Mr. Brown. Hope everyone enjoyed the rest of your summer. It's been a couple of months since we've been before you, so we appreciate your time tonight, and we're looking forward to presenting this new plan to you tonight. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to spend just a moment going through with a little bit of detail on the history of this project and how we got to this point. Okay. Perhaps that would be helpful for members of the audience who are at home who would like a little refresher.
I think that's a great idea to tell us where we've been and where we are.
Certainly. Thank you very much. So this project was initially filed with the Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency, which is also known as Mass Housing, in the spring of last year, and it was approved by Mass Housing with a finding of site eligibility for a project that consisted of 124 units in a single building with a parking level and 5 stories on just the 648 Canton Avenue portion of the development site that we'll be talking about tonight. And that site is approximately 4.7 acres. That project was filed with this board in June of last year, and the public hearing opened, I believe, in December. It was delayed for a few months due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know. In December or perhaps it was January of this year, the public hearing opened on the 124 unit project, and there were a number of public hearings before the board in which feedback was received from the members and from the town's peer reviewers. And I see that Mr. Reardon of Tetra Tech is on the line tonight. Good evening, sir. Nice to see you again. This project was also reviewed by Cliff Bomer of Davis Square Architects, as well as Jeffrey Dirk of Vanass and Associates Traffic Engineers. During the course of those public hearings, Mr. Chair, there was quite a bit of feedback that was received from the public and from the members and the peer reviewers that caused us to take another look at this project. And I would mention that during the course of this, the opportunity arose for my clients to acquire an additional portion of land to the rear of the original development site, which is located at 652 Canton Avenue, and that's approximately 3 additional acres of land. So what we're here tonight with to present to the board members is a significantly revised, significantly reduced, far less dense project than was initially proposed. Initially, as I mentioned, the 124 units was in a single building on 4.7 acres. Now we're proposing a series of low-rise townhouse style and stacked flat style buildings spread across the entire 7.7 acre site. So there was the feedback that we received from many sources pushed us, we felt, in the direction of what we're going to propose and show to the board members tonight and to the members of the public. There was a lot of feedback that was received, and we feel that what we have presented tonight will tick off as many of these boxes as we believe is possible. And we're looking forward to feedback from the members and from Mr. Corcoran, the peer reviewers, and members of the public as well. As the board members will recall, earlier this summer, we proposed that this hearing be put on pause so that we could go back to Mass Housing and request a finding from them regarding the proposal to add the rear site, three acres of land, to this development proposal, and whether that would require an additional finding of site eligibility. They did review that. They did make a finding that the current site eligibility determination was adequate for the entire 7.7 acre site, and we filed notice of that with the board in early July. And based on that, we filed, I believe on July the 29th, complete plan submissions for architecture, civil engineering, landscape design, and additional site access studies, which we'll go through in further detail tonight from all these disciplines. At the same time, Mr. Chair, we did provide copies of all these submission materials to Mr. Corcoran so that he and his clients could have the opportunity to review that. We also provided them to the town's peer reviewers so that they could have the opportunity to review them in advance of tonight's hearing. And we did receive earlier today a comment letter from Mr. Reardon, and we're in the process of reviewing that. So at this point, Mr. Chair, with that overview, this is where we are tonight. We have a new proposal for you on, as I mentioned, the entire 7.7 acre site. It's proposed to be 116 units on the full site. So it's significantly lower in density in terms of units per acre, and it's 8 units fewer than we had additionally proposed just for the front portion of the site. With me here tonight, Mr. Chair, are my client, Joe Tamposi. We have D'Artagnan Brown and Tim Loringer from Embark Architecture. We have Paul Matos and Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Civil Engineers. And I would note in that regard that they are the new civil engineers of record. They were recently retained earlier this summer. Also here tonight is Natalie Adams, registered landscape architect from Verdant Landscape, as well as Bob Michaud, a registered traffic engineer from MDM Transportation. And each of these professionals will go through their portion of the plans and be available for questions for the members and members of the public. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like, if I may, to turn it over for a few minutes to Mr. Tamposi for him to say just a few words about the motivation for this design and the concept and what we're going to be proposing you tonight.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, and we'll look forward to hearing from Mr. Tamposi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board, for being here tonight and hearing this revised project. We're very excited to share with you the revised plans after taking into account all the feedback from the prior public hearings. But before we get into the details and before I turn it over to the rest of the development team, I just wanted to take a look at the big picture. So my family and I are in the business of building housing and creating housing, affordable housing, single family housing, housing for all types of people. And so housing is a passion of ours. And we're in a very odd market right now. So if you or anyone you know has been looking for a home the past few months or really the past few years, particularly in a desirable place like Milton, you'll know that it's almost impossible to find a place to buy or rent. Prices are at all-time highs and inventories are at historic lows. In Milton alone, the average list price of a single family home on the market right now is over $1.1 million. For many people, whether you grew up in Milton, you work here, you have ties to Milton, or are simply looking for a great place to raise a family, it's impossible to stay in town with the prices that there are. So there aren't many options, and there are even fewer options that are designated as affordable units. So at the end of the day, Milton needs more housing. It needs more affordable housing. It needs more housing for families, for workers, for young professionals, for the elderly, for everyone. So with where Milton is, that's part of why we're so excited about this project. This project is going to provide a wide variety of housing types and rental options to meet the need that there is in Milton. Embark's design of innovative stacked flat and townhouse units create housing choices for all types of people. Our landscape and site design team has thought long and hard about how this community is going to lay out, how the site walks are interconnected, the open space surrounding the site, the uses for the open space, community gardens, clubhouse amenities. The way that this community is designed is something that we are really proud of. And so, as our technical experts are going in, creating this plan, we are also confident that it's going to meet, the standards of developments like this in terms of engineering, dealing with stormwater, dealing with traffic and circulation. So this is a project, again, that we're very proud of. It's going to provide much needed housing in Milton, particularly when you look at Milton, 90% of its existing affordable housing, which is less than 5% of its housing stock, is age restricted. So there's multi-year wait lists for families in Milton and for younger people in Milton. So this housing is filling a very important need. And we genuinely believe that at the end of the day, after this project is built, it's going to be an asset for the town, something that makes the town of Milton stronger, more diverse, and a more inclusive community. It's going to be attractive, well-designed, well-maintained, and it's in the center of Milton within walking distance of the high school, the hospital, public library, town offices, and other amenities in town. So we thank the board again for hearing this revised proposal, as well as all the members of the public here tonight. And I'll turn it over now to D'Artagnan to get into some of the specifics of this proposal.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe, for that. Mr. Hurley, good evening all. If it's okay, I can begin our presentation.
That would be great.
Thank you. Thanks again, Joe, for that overview. I think it hits home to many of the points we're going to talk about tonight. I think for us as architects and the greater team here, it's been quite a pivotal change, I think, from any 40B that we've engaged in the process. So we're pretty excited to show you what we have. And with that, I'm going to share screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to run through just a quick series. We have architecture, and then we go into the different disciplines, which I'm happy to flick through page, Jesse, for each of the members or turn it over. But essentially, just again, for quick reference, our two sites are located off of Canton Ave here, larger context. We have Blue Hills Parkway here, Blue Hill Avenue. And then as we zoom in to the kind of town context, you can see where my mouse is here. This is Milton High, Milton Town Hall, Winter Valley Residence, and again, all spining off of Canton Ave. And then we've kind of done a radius study, both for transportation and walkability in the town. By way of reference here, coming off of Canton Ave, this was the original proposal that Jesse spoke about. That was the 4.7 acres at 648. Folded in now is the site right directly connecting to us at 652 Canton Ave for an additional 3 acres. And this is the existing condition. So it's really just showing the depth of the lot. It's a very unique parcel We understand its contextual settings to adjacent homes on Holmes Lane, as well as Marewood, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, Marewood Drive. And so what we've done is really step back and just study. I will show you this evening just the site access, how the buildings are sited relative to context, but just by way of reference, the site itself is over 1,140 feet in length and at the widest portion, 386 feet in depth here. Quick reference again for contextual settings, so just understanding the existing additions, driveway coming up of Canton, the approach up to the existing structure that's there now. As we move around the site, just the immense vegetation around, on and around the property, which you'll note we've spent a lot of time documenting in terms of specimen trees and what we're able to save with this kind of complete redesign. Natalie and our team will get into more detail on that. But as we continue back to the 652 site, just showing more contextual settings of what's existing around the property. Quick reminder of where we were at before. So again, this was the original proposal for 124 units here, single building. And we were in design for an additional 80 units on the 652 parcel. So that was putting us north of 200 units, 204 units across those two parcels. So from that point, what we really did is, as you know, is halted the brakes, stepped back, work with Joey, Jake, and our team, and said, how are we going to really do a radical shift to the project that addresses so many of the concerns that we heard, not only from the town, but also from the abutters. And with that, we'll get into some more detail on the specificity, but what we've done is just studied the greater context of what's around us that have been successful developments in the neighborhood. So starting at Winter Valley that everyone knows well, clustering of buildings, Fuller Village on Blue Hill, again, mixed typography there, and then Fuller Village on Brush Hill as well. And it's really about clustering, creating outdoor community space, interconnectivity between the buildings, and really breaking down a singular mass of a larger building into smaller elements. So with that, what our goals, we kind of set a very clear list of goals for all disciplines on this project. And they are really around reducing density, reducing height. We'll show you tonight when we came off of Canton Ave, you were greeted originally by a 5-story building. We are now starting off with a single-story building, a 1-story going to a 2, with the max being at 3. So really paying attention to density and height, not only on the site, but relative to the abutters as well. And it's a community of smaller structures. We've really promoted a network of open space, understanding how we can distribute drainage and stormwater, really because we've been able to change the footprint of the building. And this is in large by eliminating the garage structure, which has come about by the change in the type of structure, but also in the drastic unit reduction that Joey has given us a go-ahead with. We've eliminated the ring road, which we heard was a concern, shifted the driveway entry location, created a second means of emergency egress, and really, quite importantly here, retained the landscape buffer and understood and paid careful attention to the existing specimen trees and how those can factor into the new design. So from that, what we started to do is develop a kit of housing types, housing parts that we can use on this massing strategy. So it's a combination of townhouses that vary from 2 to 3 stories, attached dwelling structures. They have dedicated entrance and private patios at every unit, and then private garage parking within the 3-story dwelling units. Then we have a series of stacked flats, and these really will range between 2 and 3 stories. 8 to 12 to 16 units, and it's a combination of gable and flat roofs, really studying kind of the surrounding architectural narrative. And then what we'll have off of the entry is really a beautiful single-story structure that kind of sets the tone for entering the development. This is where we'll have rental services for the development, mail-in parcel storage. As mentioned just now, the leasing offices. We'll have a fitness lounge center and covered bike parking and basement storage as well. And again, this is really, tying into what we understand of the architectural context. So just immediately on Canton Ave and Holmes Lane, studying that in much greater detail. And then from there, drawing what we see as great architectural precedent. So a lot of this ties into the quality, the design that the Temposis would like to exude on the site, playing off of the architectural elements from the various clapboard side and board and batten to different exposures, window types, everything kind of, we'll definitely have more time to dive into further detail, but really just demonstrating the quality we'd like to set the tone with here. So from that, what our team has done is really step back and dissected the site. So understanding coming off of Canton Ave here in green, essentially surrounding the sites and in greater density areas of direct proximity to abutters, what the foliage and trees that we would like to maintain. So at a minimum, understanding what our tree buffer is around the entire property. And then from there, we've gone through and designated different zones of what we perceive density can happen on the site. This understanding from what I showed you earlier, kind of the larger context. And so what we're cognizant of is coming in with a very low, and you'll see this in the next couple slides, a single-story structure, having a series of two-story dwelling units, both in the townhouses and flats that I've talked about. And then really, with the critical eye, what we've noted is the rear portion of the site on 652, we believe can support the most density. And we're only coming in there, even though we say that, with a 3-story structure. And structures because we've broken down the scale. So this is really kind of our massing strategies and site design approach. And from there, we'll get into a series of diagrams, but this is where you can start to see how the site plan takes shape. So coming in off of Canton Ave, we've adjusted the driveway entry. We're greeted by a single-story amenity structure that I mentioned. Here we have a pull-off zone. So if there's somebody visiting, you can pull off or drop off. As we move through the site, there's a nice, really hierarchy around a central spine to the project. And then from there, we pull off into different zones. And that allows us to start to create the sense of neighborhood and connectivity, both through sidewalk and siting of these structures. So in this portion here, we're really going to enter the site with a series of townhouse style units. You can see the very ample green and buffered zone that we've been able to preserve with the specimens trees that were noted of quite importance, on the site itself. As we move up through the site, we have a series of stacked flats. And then as we move to the rear of 652, this is the one portion only that we thought it was appropriate to have 3-story structures, just given the adjacency to Winter Valley and the density that's on that site being able to support this narrative. A couple of things to note here, again, by eliminating this is an axon view looking back, so same exact view if you recall earlier from the 2 buildings that we had. The beauty about this design and the approach is by getting rid of those 2 large singular buildings is we can really play with the natural topography of the site and being able to set each of the grade points for these proposed structures relative to existing conditions and cognizant of abutting properties. And so you can see here the way we've been able to carefully narrate the approach through the site, we feel is quite a dramatic shift from what we had before. And this diagram here is just really superimposing just a very simple notations around building height. So you can see the one designates a single-story structure. All of these structures through here are all two-story structures, cognizant of the housing structures on homes in Marewood here up to the page right. And then only really up in the rear portion as we get to the Winter Valley residence, you can see just a couple buildings at the 3-story height. From here, we're rotating the view back towards Canton Ave here. So again, you can see the approach off of Canton Ave greeted by the leasing amenity structure and then moving through the buildings. And this is really made up of the architectural types that I mentioned earlier, but a combination of both gable roofed and flat roof structures with dormers and mansard detailing. And then as we move towards Winter Valley, a set of gabled roof structures here as well. And we're going to get into this in more detail with Natalie, but without stealing her thunder, it's essentially what we're also looking at is just the proposed site elements around site fencing, site visibility, dog park. And these are things I think, Natalie, if I'm not jumping ahead of you, I think you're going to talk about in more detail, but I'll just quickly pull this in. And just the quality of the outdoor space, play space for children, bikes, outdoor activities, which we'll talk about shortly. Getting into the actual architectural types themselves. So this is our 2-story stacked flat type. Again, a combination of 2-bedroom units, just the quality of the materials we're looking to do between clapboard siding to vertical board and batten. And then the architectural asphalt shingle. Then the mix here, another type where we have a combination of 1 and 3-bedroom units. This is more of the 3-story stacked flat type as well, where we have a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. The height only being 32 feet off of grade. And then here, this is a series, and you can see how working with the grading here, we can step the 2-story townhouse types. So here, in this case, we have a combination of 2-bedroom units. So you'd come in, kitchen, living, dining, and go up to the bedroom levels. And then this is the 3-story townhouse type. So these will be more of the three-bedroom types, direct stoop entries for each of the units, plus indoor garage parking as well, and then broken up into a townhouse narrative. And then this is kind of just an early passive program, but really about the architectural narrative for the single-story amenity clubhouse building as we enter the property. Here, we're thinking of playing into natural stone veneers, bring in some natural wood elements, perhaps a standing seam roof, but really kind of set the tone of entering into the development itself. And then a series of site sections. So here you can see this is kind of midway up the site through the central boulevard here. So pulling off left and right, really the 2-story elements. You can see those were crafted again in understanding the abutting properties and bringing down the density. As a reminder earlier, this whole zone here was all 5-story single building. So, if you can see my cursor was more like this as a single volume. So I think quite a dramatic change. And then this is an architectural rendering looking at this part of the boulevard. So what we've done is really taken a moment to just look at how our building fits into the sites now that we've kind of really, done a 180 on the approach. And the next series of renderings will just show as we move through the site what the goals and vision of this new proposal is. But it's essentially, as we come up the center drive here, this is the amenity building to the right. And then you can see the series of the 2-story townhouses as we move further up the site here. Looking back, this is through, if you can see the little legend here, a 2-story and a 3-story stacked flats, with the idea that this central area is going to be a great gathering pavilion for community members. And then this is a rendering of that zone. So here you can see what we're doing is, it is important, we believe, when we're creating housing for these units to have great outdoor space. So not only are we cognizant of buffering to adjacent abutters, but internal to our developments. And because of the site plan and approach, we're able to have these great zones for gathering. So those are more inward facing in it, but all beautifully designed, kind of connecting sidewalks, planting beds, direct entry to units. Picking up what I mentioned is really honing back to what are the objectives of this redesign. So you can see here kind of the quality of building materials, the really playfulness to the design of the structures, varied mix that is really relevant in the architectural narrative of the neighborhood as well. And then this is really taking, and you can see the two red arrows here, our understanding of if you're standing on Holmes Lane now, looking into the property, what do you see? What is the existing context look like at 22 and 30? And then the existing conditions here, you can see the specimen trees, the grading, and all of that you can see here on the proposed is being preserved. So it's quite pivotal in terms of where we were before, which, a lot of that was coming out. What we are looking to do is enhance and bolster the perimeter planting around the property, but quite clear here in terms of the specimen trees being able to be salvaged in this new design and become really an enhancing element to the new proposal. So from that, we've taken that view. You can see kind of the new perimeter fencing, new arborvitae evergreen, which we'll talk about in more detail. But because of the really lush tree foliage that exists today, being able to preserve, our building is very, very minimally visible through that, which is quite a drastic change from the 5-story we had earlier. As we move further down into the site, you can see two views here, set up a Mergewood Drive. And again, looking back in, and this is where we're going to provide emergency egress should it be needed into the central part of the site. So here again, the existing trees and vegetation all to be preserved. And then this new egress point being able to, which is very, if you can see here, very close to where the existing asphalt drive is, but that becomes kind of a element we thought that was important for this development. So here you can see a proposed rendering for this space. So again, with the foliage intact and supplemented too. In the center here, it's a permeable pavers, so it allows the grass to grow through, but accessed by emergency vehicles. And then the dwelling units themselves. So these are all on this side here. If you look at the legend, two-story stacked flats that I mentioned earlier. And then also we took a moment to also look at the impact of shadow study on the site. So one thing you can see here is we've studied all of the major time zones and really done a sunrise to sunset approach, looking at the different times of day and what the shadows might be. You can see really this is set on June 21st, sunrise up here at 5:07 a.m. With the sunset in 8:24. And so here during the 15 hours and technically 17 minutes of sunrise and sunset, we've been able to map out and looked at the casting of shadows. So really, because of the massive drop in height, you can see there's essentially no impact to the abutting properties because we've been able to go from the 1 to 2 to very few 3-story structures. And you can see any of the shadowing isn't impacting any of the abutting properties there. As we move through here to the March equinox. Again, sunrise starts a little later, a little darker in the morning, sun sets a little earlier, and you can see again here, you know, although we do tap into this end here, we're actually not hitting any of the Winter Valley residences there at all. And so essentially we go through this to the December. So, you know, as we're approaching those months now, we can see everything is getting darker around us, sadly. But again, because of the contextual height of these buildings, you know, very minimal, if any, impact. You can see here, and this is really where, you know, where the buildings fall. And again, one thing to keep in mind is this is pure structure without any foliage. So, you know, we were looking at laying foliage on this, the existing tree specimens. It almost felt a little disingenuous because it made everything dark at this time of day. But essentially, when you factor in all of the heavy tree plantings here, our shadows in effect are literally stopping at the trees, and the trees would continue on to the abutting properties. So it's really, you know, we feel no impact to abutting residents. I think with that, I'm going to, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll continue on to landscape architecture. Jesse, is that how we want to kind of approach, get through all the disciplines, or would we like to stop at architecture?
I think it makes sense to go forward unless the board members have any questions at this point.
Mike Duchette, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to introduce Natalie, our esteemed landscape architect, and I'm happy to turn page for you.
Thank you, D'Artagnan.
Thank you for that presentation, D'Artagnan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, D'Artagnan. My name is Natalie Adams. I'm with Verdant Landscape Architecture. D'Artagnan, thank you. You've made my job easier with your presentation. You really did a great job. This first plan we're looking at is our the overall landscape plan. And we really have three main goals as landscape architects, and that is to fit the development into the neighborhood by preserving the trees and the edges, and to support residential living, and then three, to minimize impact to the neighbors. Additionally, for lighting, the lighting plan will curtail light pollution with dark sky friendly lighting, and no light trespass to adjacent properties. So what I really want to address on this page is the trees we're saving. So I heard one of the previous comments last year was that people had a hard time saying what was existing and what is proposed. So with the existing vegetation, trees and shrubs here is a different color green. And D'Artagnan, can you just highlight over the, yeah, see that green there? That's existing. And then our new trees, our evergreen trees, are a darker green, and then our proposed trees are a lighter green right there. Yes, thank you. And so as we're looking at this, just talking about existing vegetation, thank you, D'Artagnan, you really outlined it previously. What we're looking at is these edges, and I'm going to start clockwise at Canton Avenue, and we're going to see over there at Canton Avenue, we see that big, all those large evergreen trees, a deciduous tree, another evergreen tree, and that woods type atmosphere right there. And then a very large, what I like to call witness tree right there in the corner that we're saving. And then another group of significant Norway spruce right there. And then we move up to Holmes Lane, and as D'Artagnan described, we're adding to that buffer with our evergreen material, and really strengthening it as well as adding a board fence. So as we continue around there, we have a really nice buffer up there at Holmes Lane. And then we get over to the double townhouses there, and to the right side of the sheet going clockwise, we have a nice buffer. I'm just going around the property, a nice buffer all along that property line there. And then at Mergewood Drive, we have a really deep buffer there, and we're also adding evergreen material there at the fire access. And also, as we continue along the property line back towards Canton Avenue, we again are providing more evergreen material to add to the buffer, and then also really adding to that, not adding, using that existing plant material right there at Canton Avenue, and that's really adding to it there. So now I would like to go on to page 2, which really describes our concept. And what our design concept is for this development is it's an eco-friendly country garden style. And that's what we're using for our planting techniques. But this page here really starts to describe some of the some of the things that we're doing to support residential living. So as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, we'd like to support natural play areas with play structures for a more creative play rather than the traditional playgrounds you've been seeing. We'd like to see a more natural play areas. And the place we wanted to put that was right in that corner where we're saving all those large trees over there. Thank you, D'Artagnan, right there. And we would surgically install them, making sure that the trees were okay and the grades were okay, that it was accessible for all. Moving on to the other, and I'm going over our components. So the next one I'm going to go over is this contemporary pavilion with the gas grill stations for the expansive lawn area. So we have a nice big lawn area down at the end of our central spine to the site right there, and that really is a welcoming area for open play for all. And the other element that's really just such a bonus with this site is the raised beds at the community garden area, and we're putting them right there down south. They are by existing trees, but I really feel there's enough area there to support raised garden beds. And the last image on the top is a schematic design, really schematic of site signage, and we'd like to use that field stone wall language at the front of the site for the signage. And then going down to the lower left, you see an image of the closed board fence, which D'Artagnan, I'm gonna have you lead me around the site. I'm not sure if anybody can see it, but we have closed board fence going along this property line, right along there, right along to that existing tree, and then it switches over to the split rail fence, where you'll see an image of that on the lower left as well. And the split rail fence is, and I think it's added to by that woodsy landscape feel, and it goes around that top property line and then down that property line across Mergewood Drive and over to the townhouses, and then it turns into closed board fence over there. And then another type of fence we're proposing is a contemporary picket, and a really open feel, but it would play off the colors and the architecture, and it's not so much to enclose anything, but just kind of like a aesthetically appealing to this site. And part of our efforts here for stormwater amelioration is to use pervious pavers, and all of the patios have pervious pavers. There are a couple of rows of townhouses that have a deck out back, but most all of our the outdoor patios are pervious pavers. And then we're also using a concrete sidewalk throughout the site, nice, clean, easy to maintain. And then we have the green pavement there at the fire entry and exit as a secondary entry and exit for the fire and emergency vehicles. Thank you, D'Artagnan. Can you move on to the planting plan? It's paid, yes, thank you. So here we see, and this is where we really get into the eco country garden aesthetic. I'd just like to say that, you know, we're using habitat enhancing plantings that support pollinators and birds. And the eco garden areas are really focused at the patio areas and at the clubhouse. And then beyond that, we're using meadows. Oh, let's go down and look at those images. So in the lower left, we have the outdoor social gathering space at the clubhouse. And this is just a quick shot of, we'd like to see something at the clubhouse a bit more manicured, but still it has that country garden aesthetic. We're still using those native plant materials. I tell you, at Verdant, we just use native plant materials on our planting plans. We really try to support our native. Oops, start Tanya.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to zoom in for you and I messed it up. I apologize.
That's fine. Made me smile. And then the next image on the lower left, these are some of my favorites because these really embody that eco garden where your plant material is a little mixed up, you're adding some boulders and stones, you're letting the water come into these natural swales in between these patio areas. A lot of grass, a lot of perennials, some shrubs that are native and support those birds and bees. And then, of course, the next image over is that lawn space for informal play. Everybody likes to stretch their muscles. And then at the places where it's a bit more expansive and we don't want that real manicured lawn because it really drains our environment, we are proposing these mini meadows that soften man-made edges, and they're mowed once a year in the fall, and we can really maintain those areas specifically. So if you look up at our plant list, I'm almost done here. I just have the lighting plan to go. But if anyone's interested in looking at our plant list and really reviewing it, we have a count on our trees, we have a count on our shrubs. We're listing our perennials and grasses. They're all native, and then we get into our eco garden shrubs and perennials there. And this is really a probable plant list. We'd like to really hone it before it goes into construction documents, but we're really looking forward to this. I'm really excited about this project. Now, if we go on to page 4, this is done by our lighting consultant. So I'm not sure how many questions I can answer to this, but I do know that there's no light trespass on neighboring properties, and this crew who did this at Luminar really followed the town policy of what they expect for lighting in a new development. So that's it for me. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Natalie. I believe we're going to jump into civil engineering.
Yes, I think that's right, D'Artagnan. We'll turn it over then to Phil Cordero from Allen and Major, and I believe he has his own slides to share. Is that right, Phil?
Well, I think we can, D'Artagnan has done such an impressive job tonight. I think we can let him shepherd the slides here and I can navigate them, the discussion, if you don't mind.
Awesome.
Don't ripple the waters if we don't need to. How's that sound?
Awesome.
Thank you, board, for having me here this evening. For the record, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates. We're happy to be the site engineers on this project. I think obviously our role here is to integrate with the rest of this team. I think D'Artagnan has done a fabulous job of really laying out what this property contains, most notably in terms of constraints. And there are a number of them in terms of not only the existing residential dwellings that are out there, the lack of, excuse me, stormwater controls. We have grade challenges. We have adjacent wetland resource areas. We have the abutter separation issues that have been raised. We have the need to keep the landscape, greenscape, the legacy trees that Natalie just went over with everybody, and really balance all of those together and put the puzzle pieces together that really drive the site layout that D'Artagnan laid out for the board already, but then our role to take that site plan and really develop the infrastructure around it. So the slide that's on the screen right now is obviously a revisitation of the existing conditions of the site. We have the two dwellings at 648 and 652, And really the takeaway that I'd like the board to see here from our perspective, from a site design, is uncontrolled stormwater. Everything is simply rolling out towards Canton Avenue. Everything is rolling out towards Mergewood. We have different design points around the perimeter of the property to different wetland resource areas. And we took those all into account as we started to redesign the site. Now, the other thing that we had the advantage of, especially from the site perspective side, is we had the benefit of hindsight. Obviously, the initial application that came through that this board had reviewed and the previous civil engineer had designed around was a much denser program. But at the same time, the benefit of that for us is he was certainly able to identify all of the engineering challenges, the issues that the town would like us to address, the issues that Mr. Reardon from Tetra Tech would like us to address, the abutter concerns, et cetera. So we took the liberty of encompassing those into everything that we're doing here on the site from the site perspective. D'Artagnan, could you go to the next slide, please? This is very simply a site preparation and erosion control plan. And the takeaway here for the benefit of the board is that we have contemplated and provided design direction, even at this early stage before we have a contractor in tow, of really how the site is going to be prepared, how we're going to install erosion fencing, how we're going to protect the abutters, how we're going to protect downstream areas, the wetland resource areas, specific protection that will go around legacy trees, around the tree buffers, around the perimeter of the site, and really how we're surgically going into this site and taking it apart. And taking it apart so that way we can keep a lot of the pieces that are necessary to the success of the site. Next slide, please. You're looking here more detailed on the erosion control. I think redundant to what I just outlined. So we'll make sure that proper precautions are put into place. One of our stops is also with the Milton Conservation Commission. So we will seek an order of conditions from them under the Wetlands Protection Act. And we'll ask them to review that we have done everything that we can to either avoid, minimize, or mitigate all of the work that we're doing on the site. And in this case, it's really, it's all buffer zone work. There are no permanent wetland alterations. And we think we can certainly provide detail to the commission at the appropriate time. Next slide, please. So this is the design layout, which D'Artagnan really covered in terms of the presentation, in terms of the number of buildings, the number of units. Repetitively, we do have the central spine roadway. So we're creating that sense of welcoming coming into the site, and all the buildings flank around that. Now, what that allows us to do is to make sure that we're respective of separation to property lines, separation to abutters. And in doing so, we've parked out the site, as you can see on the plan here. And we have 186 parking spaces, which nets out to approximately 1.6 per unit, which is a pretty healthy margin of parking for residential developments of this type. The site, as you see, is accessibly compliant. We have some challenges relative to grade, and I'll talk about those a little bit further when we get to the grading plan. But once we get up to the clubhouse, everything within the site is accessibly compliant. We wanted to make sure we piggybacked off of Natalie's design intent and the spirit of the landscaping, and most notably the hardscape, that you can circumnavigate everywhere around this site. It's entirely walkable. It's entirely connected. We want to make sure that you can get from the clubhouse to the playground, to the community gardens, to the open play space. And we certainly have accounted for that here. Next slide, please. This is simply a blow up of the site. We can circle back to these if any of the members of the board have any particular questions. But I think if we can advance through, since D'Artagnan did in fact cover our drop-off zone at the clubhouse, the pedestrian connectivity, which is again really highlighted by those crosswalks that come off of each of the sidewalks, and then the building product type that he's already covered. So maybe if you could jump to the next slide. And that's simply the back half of the site. Now, this one is an interesting portion of the site as D'Artagnan laid out, but from a site engineering perspective, really challenging to make sure we could put all the parts and pieces together to make them work successfully. The stacked flats present for us a unique challenge to make sure that all of the doors are at even elevations as much as possible for constructability. So when we get into the grading here, I want you to pay particular attention to how we elected to handle this from a site design perspective. So if you could advance, sir. Next slide. Why don't we go to the next slide, since it'll zoom in just a little bit more for the board. So certainly what you're looking at here is the front half of the site. And this is our grading and drainage plan. And I'm going to just highlight several features. Takeaways that we know we needed to handle from the previous comments that were received on the application, and then certain very site-specific features that were necessitated by this design layout. So what we heard in the original plan was we wanted to make sure that we provided a nice level landing area here adjacent to Canton Avenue relative to our grade. So we have that 2% landing that we need for safe intersection distances, stopping distances. Certainly here in the Northeast with snow and winter and ice freezing conditions, we want that level landing. But we do need to raise grade as you come through this portion of the site. And what we need to do is we needed to be able to elevate the remainder of the site in order to get our stormwater systems on property. Those familiar with this area, we've done some extensive soil testing here. The soil is not great. I think that was the previous testimony to the application. Very high water table, very dense in terms of in-place material, a lot of loam content, a lot of silt content. And because of that, excuse me, we needed to really elevate the site to make sure we have separation distance to the groundwater table. So because of that, this area through here at the clubhouse is steep at about 7.5 to 7.9% grade. It's really the transition zone to the site. But once we get up to the top elevation, everything beyond here, we start getting into the 4.5% grade along this main roadway. And that makes sure that everything is accessibly compliant and access to the buildings are well maintained. Now, the other element that I'll draw the board's attention to while we're here is what we heard loud and clear from the previous review is there wasn't enough mitigation for stormwater. There was concern relative to how the stormwater will be handled on site. So I'll start drawing the board's attention to an underground system located here, an underground system located here, and an underground system located here. And these are really just the lower tier of stormwater controls that we're going to have on site. And these are designed to mitigate up through the 100-year storm volume. We're releasing water into the municipal system at Canton Avenue, but we are holding back as much of the water as we can, certainly meeting peak design flow regulations and certainly peak volume attenuation also in this application. Excuse me. If you could advance to the back half of the site, please, D'Artagnan.
Oh, did it jump?
Yes, please.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. This is the continuation through here of that 4% grade. And then what happens through here, as I alluded to earlier, is we start to transition into a different product type with these stacked flats. So what you're going to notice, this shaded area across the rear of the site, this is part of our stormwater system for the property. And we're proposing the use of porous asphalt here. And the porous asphalt allows us to do several things. We're able to keep the site at a flattened elevation to make sure that the accessibility to all of the doors of the stacked flats is maintained and the constructability is as efficient as we can have it. It also allows us to minimize stormwater structures on site. Not minimize stormwater control, but we're minimizing stormwater structures. So instead of running water along the gutter lines into catch basins, we're pushing that water directly into the pavement matrix and getting it to a subsurface retention field as quickly as we can, essentially eliminating the gutter flow. So if I remove my notes here, the shaded area, in addition to denoting it as porous asphalt, underneath there is what's called an R-tank storage system. And the R-tank, for visual purposes, I don't have any graphics of them here this evening, but think of them as a milk crate. And it's a stacked series of milk crates that allow us to retain stormwater embedded in stone, wrapped in filter fabric. And we're able to put a bathtub below the surface to retain that water and then slowly release it back into the municipal system when it's safe to do so. And by going to this broad scope system, so these very large areas, we're able to distribute that stormwater across a wider area of the site. Think about it in terms of if I try to push a man over and his 2 feet are standing together, I could do it easily. But if he spreads apart, it's a little harder for me to knock it over. That distribution of flow is really beneficial to us from a site perspective side. It allows us really to maximize the storage volume on site, maximize the amount of peak rate and volume reductions that we can achieve with the project. Now, embedded in porous asphalt, we'll want to make sure we draw to the board's attention, and your peer review consultant, Mr. Reardon, who we've already had a really strong interaction with on this application, and he's given us his initial peer review as of this afternoon. We have some information that we need to get back to him so he can provide some official recommendations to the board. And some of those, because it's porous asphalt, it's increased maintenance and responsibility. We understand that there's some difficult connotations surrounding porous asphalt. If you fail to maintain porous asphalt, it becomes a liability more than a resource. And that's true of most things, but if the porous asphalt is not properly maintained, we are not properly managing the stormwater. And we'll want to purport to a response to the Tetra Tech commentary from today, again, for the benefit of the board, as to how we feel this is very beneficial to the site and how it can be properly maintained and be an accommodation to the site. Now, when we walk around the perimeter of the property, what you'll notice is we have transition slopes. And the transition slopes are really to get us back down to existing grade based on the elevation, the grade change that I needed to bring forth to make sure that my stormwater systems, both the 3 that were highlighted at the front of the site and also the porous asphalt through here, have appropriate separation to the groundwater table. It's very important to the treatment aspects to make sure we meet water quality demands. The porous asphalt section itself will also have appropriate filtration media installed below it. So we can have that right specification to meet the DEP standards. Now, one of the other elements that I'll bring up while we're on this slide, because we've had such great communication with Tetra Tech already on this project, is we also want to give some feedback for the benefit of Tetra Tech, ultimately to the board, what those R tanks below the asphalt look like. So we're going to give you some detail on that was maybe omitted from this initial submission, but we welcome the feedback and the conversation surrounding it. So we'll get that over to you. I think through conversation through my previous teammates, this is obviously the Mergewood connection for the fire department. We've already had an initial meeting with the fire department relative to how the site layout works out. And the initial feedback is very, very positive. We'll continue to have those conversations with them, and we'll continue to get their feedback and modify the plans as necessary. D'Artagnan, would you mind going to the next slide, please?
It's skipping around. Sorry, is
that's absolutely fine. We'll take a really high altitude view here for the benefit of the board. I'm not sure anybody will particularly care about this, but this is our utilities plan. And what I'd like the takeaway for the board here this evening is we have utilities located on site. We have them located to each of the buildings. We have them coordinated as best we can at this permit level stage. At the request of Tetra Tech, as part of the response, we'll do some additional coordination of those utilities around the porous asphalt section and the subsurface stormwater system. So we'll get some more detail together for that. But more importantly, we've already had some initial conversation with Ms. Fernandez as the town engineer. What we need to do is coordinate further with her, coordinate our connections to Canton Avenue, both from a water and sewer perspective. So we are well on our way with those 2 aspects. We're talking through the capacity needs, the existing pipe needs, or excuse me, the existing pipe available capacity. How does it operate? Things of that nature. Our issue here is obviously to make sure that this project is non-invasive to the municipal system of the town of Milton. And we'll deal with that on the sewer and the waterfront with our ongoing conversations. One of the other things that I did fail to mention relative to being non-invasive to municipal systems, regarding the grading and the drainage, we are ultimately connecting out to Canton Avenue. And we have purported through our application that our rates of runoff will be greatly reduced from where they stand today. And one of the things that we'll coordinate with the town engineer is really how those capacities for the 30-inch receiving pipe in Canton Avenue for the drainage work. But also we want to bake into our program at the positive suggestion of your peer review consultant, some fail-safe mechanisms. And he's asked us to modify our grading slightly to build in some benches. And what those benches will do is to provide some fail-safe protection that if any of our stormwater, and I know I'm on a different slide, but if any of our stormwater were to somehow escape through here, he wants to make sure that it doesn't adversely affect Canton Avenue. So we're going to build in benchmarks that create diversions and bypasses along here that really make Canton Avenue protection paramount from a stormwater perspective. I think, D'Artagnan, if you could advance to the next two slides. Those are utility zoom-ins. We can certainly talk about great detail if the board requires there. And that might be it from the site perspective. Yeah. So before I turn it over to my fellow colleagues on traffic, I think what I'd like to leave the board with is where do we go from here from our site design perspective? The fact that we've already engaged with the town engineer, the fact that we've already engaged with Tetra Tech, we know we owe them additional information and we appreciate those open lines of communication. So it is our intent the next time you see us, we will have advanced these plans in a manner that seeks to address their comments by written narrative. Some of those narratives are engineering based, as I just laid out. Some of them are simply clarification based. For example, one of the elements from our peer review was the nature of the stream that's to the west of us, which whether it's perennial or intermittent. And we'll respond to questions like that as being, in this case, an intermittent stream based on our ORAD with the Milton Conservation Commission. But again, that open series of communication and discussion, I think, can really build up the efficiency of this, the site design, the review of it. And we hope it eases the board's review as the application proceeds. So I'm happy to answer any questions upon conclusion of the presentation tonight, but that's an overview of where we are from the site side. And D'Artagnan, I'll turn it back over to Master of Ceremonies, you and Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Next, we'll go to Bob Michaud of MDM Transportation for a brief overview of the traffic safety and site access.
Yeah, and I think, Bob, actually, you may have your own slides you want to pop up, right?
I do, so I'll do a share screen if you don't mind, D'Artagnan.
I'll give my finger a rest.
You've done a stellar job. Okay. Okay, for the record, I am Robert Michaud, a principal with MDM Transportation Consultants. We're based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. And what I'd like to do tonight is really not recap every aspect of transportation because the board has heard testimony for this project, and given its reduction in size, there really aren't any material changes in any of the findings that we presented to the board. But in that vein, I will recap some of the highlights and conclusions of what we've studied and recommendations, and provide an update as well as to the circulation aspects of the plan itself. As I've presented in prior testimony, the site in context of the area roadways is shown in this diagram to include intersections to the north at Reedsdale Road, signalized intersection there, the signalized intersection of Thatcher and Highland Street, just to the east of the site, Gulliver Street, which is just offset from the property, Guile Road at the high school, and finally Blue Hills Parkway to the west at Uncudy Road, which is also signalized. All of that was studied as part of our submitted traffic impact and access study to June of 2020, which has been peer reviewed We will be submitting responses to peer review, but at the pleasure of the board, we would ask that the peer reviewer consider the most recent plan and perhaps even amend its review to include that plan set so that we can provide a comprehensive response to their review. As Phil has laid out the site, he has described the interaction with the fire department to ensure that access and circulation for the largest potentially responding vehicle is acceptable to that department. We've actually conducted a auto turn swept path analysis for the largest potentially responding vehicle, which is the Milton Ladder 1 vehicle. It's shown in this schematic drawing on the current site plan. This has been reviewed initially with the chief on August 27th of this year. He is in the process of reviewing the details of this and continuing his conversation with Allen and Major as well. But the outcome of this analysis clearly shows that the proposed access point at Canton Avenue provides the geometry, the width, and the dimensions that are necessary to accommodate the swept paths for this particular design vehicle without encroachment. As you come into the property itself, there is ability for that same vehicle to make swept paths to various building locations on the site and to conduct the appropriate what we call hammerhead movements to the extent that vehicle pulls into, for instance, the most easterly portion of the site. Here, they have the ability to access individual buildings and then reverse direction to leave the property, either through the primary access point at Canton Avenue or through the secondary Mergewood Drive gated access point that D'Artagnan had laid out and that Phil described. So we're pleased to report that the geometry, the layout, the circulation aspects of this property all accommodate that type of a design vehicle. The conclusions of our traffic impact and access study really remain unchanged from what we presented. We document the safety-based criteria for the driveway at Canton Avenue, which is based on regulatory and observed travel speeds on that roadway to ensure that the visibility to the driveway, the sight lines for approaching vehicles, as well as departing vehicles from the property have applicable sight lines to one another for safety reasons. We know that the driveway in its current form will meet or exceed those applicable safety-based criteria. The project with fewer units is expected to have really an immaterial change in the amount of traffic that we've already evaluated on area roadways, perhaps even a slightly lower amount of traffic relative to our original submittal. We know that there will be fewer than 60 vehicle trips total being generated by this use during its highest activity periods in the morning and evening on weekdays. That's one vehicle leaving or coming into the site over the course of an entire hour, about one vehicle per minute, very marginal number. And that number of trips will be inconsequential to travel on area roadways. It really represents a very small percentage change in the amount of traffic that currently uses Canton Avenue and area roadways, which are close to about 1,000 cars per hour versus the 30 or so additional trips that would be added to any given specific component of any of the roadways in that area. From an operating perspective, we've conducted a level of service analysis. The driveway itself, we know will operate with very minimal delays at a letter designation of C or better, which is defined as an acceptable urban standard for intersections, and that the remaining intersections that I've pointed out in the first diagram, the signalized locations located east and west of the property, will not sustain a change in letter grade designation or a material increase in the amount of delay or vehicle queuing that they would otherwise have independent of the project. So there's really no change in what those operations or queuing conditions are like as a function of the project. And as I've just presented, there is adequate circulation that would provide unimpeded access and circulation for the largest responding vehicle, the Milton Ladder 1 vehicle, which is then supported by the secondary gated access at Mergewood Drive. With that, I will conclude and reiterate that we will be submitting responses to peer review, but I would ask that the board, consider whether the peer reviewer should have an opportunity to amend its review to include the most recent site plan so that we can provide a more comprehensive response to their combination of comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes our presentation this evening. I think it's pretty clear we've been quite busy over the course of the last 3 months since we were last before you. We appreciate the board's accommodation and providing us the additional time to come back with a comprehensive submission. And I think the work has paid off with this new design. I think this is a good new direction for the town, for the developer. And I think that this project has benefited greatly from the time that the board has allowed us to take the time and reimagine this project. So with that, we appreciate the board's time tonight. We'll be open for questions and feedback from the board and members of the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer, and thank you to each of the members of the team. This has been very helpful tonight. I guess what I'd like to do first is to open it up to the board members. So Mike or Ted, do you have any questions of the applicant or any of the folks who sort of testify this evening on any subject?
I have no questions at present. No.
Mike, anything you want to add?
I don't have any questions now, but I'd also like to hear if anybody from the public has any questions.
I agree. I don't have any either. I think I understood pretty much everything that was said here tonight. So I guess what I'd next do is then turn to Ned Corcoran. Ned, I know you've been on the line all evening. Do you have questions or comments with respect to any of the information that's been presented here this evening?
I do have some preliminary questions, but I think I have engineering comment coming from two consultants who presented to the board previously that I would like opportunity for them to present their significant comments on the stormwater and other issues that need to be addressed.
Are they going to do that tonight yet?
I'm not ready to do that tonight, no.
Okay, understood.
I'm also think it's important that the board take on the issue of the access to Mergewood Road. And I think that's a significant issue that's going to have to be taken up. I have a memorandum that I'm preparing to file with the board. I'd like the opportunity to just discuss that. But my client, one of my clients who lives on Mergewood Road, owns the 50-foot right-of-way. It is subject to an easement for access that was granted in a 1957 permit for the owner of 652 Canton Avenue. That is access that was granted for a single family dwelling on a 3-acre lot. This board does not have the authority to surcharge that easement and to allow the use of additional traffic, emergency or otherwise, onto Mergewood Road. I would point to the Zoning Board of Appeals of Groton versus Housing Appeals Committee. You cannot surcharge an easement that is owned privately. My client owns the right-of-way subject to the right of the owner of 652 Canton Avenue to access it for a driveway for a single family. That's it. And the rest of the clients who own property on Mergewood Road have the same easement benefit, but they're also entitled to the benefits associated with that easement, which is they are entitled to be protected from any overcharging of that easement. I think this is a significant issue, and the board needs to dig into this in a next hearing and make some preliminary determinations, because it will have a significant effect on emergency access and site circulation and a number of units that could be accommodated on this site. So I will have a memo prepared to be delivered to the board for consideration for next week or the week after at your discretion, but I think it's a significant issue that has to be raised in the context of this hearing. I know it's one of the waivers that has been requested is a waiver from the conditions of the permit that was granted by the zoning board or the Board of Appeals in the 1950s. That is not a waiver of a local ordinance or regulation. It is a waiver of a permit, the benefit of which runs to other property owners on Mergewood Road. They're entitled to the benefit of that. They created property rights with respect to that. They're entitled to have those property rights protected by this board. And I think that's an issue for this board. The board in the Zoning Board of Appeals versus Groton was actually the appellant of a decision rendered by the Housing Appeals Committee that ordered the town to grant easements over property that the developer did not own. And the Supreme Judicial Court overturned that, basically finding that you cannot order the granting of easements on other property. And so that's a significant legal issue that I think the board has to address as it moves forward with this hearing. I'll have other testimony ready in the next couple of weeks from John Chesia, who's a civil engineer, from Scott Horsley, who's a wetland scientist, who have evaluated these plans with respect to stormwater management, site circulation, access, construction management, impact on wetlands, et cetera. There's significant additional test pits that need to be performed. There's an inadequate level of testing that's been done to date relative to subsurface water conditions, particularly with respect to how the stormwater detention system would lay out. I did file today with Tim Zerwinski with the board a report from John Chesia. I have Scott Horsley will be finalizing his this week. That will be available for the board to review as well. But those are significant issues as well. But I think there are a lot of, and certainly we want to hear from Mr. Reardon and the town's other peer review experts as well. So I'm not prepared to go any further tonight relative to questions. But I do think it's important that the board address the site access issue for 652 and that we have the opportunity to present the experts that we've retained, and happy to do so after Mr. Reardon testifies on his comments.
You know, what I have in mind for this is that we would have the peer review people hopefully available next week to testify. Judy Barrett isn't available this evening, so we can't have the benefit of her input as to sort of scheduling and timing, but that would be my hope. That we'd hear from them. And then I guess, depending on how that goes, Mr. Corcoran, we could either begin to hear from you and others that want to have their say here, either at the end of next week or maybe the following week on maybe the 28th, whatever that date would be. So I'll only observe with respect to the issue of the driveway that sounds more to me like a land court issue than it is a Board of Appeals issue, but I'm certainly, as some of you may be aware, I've done a tiny bit of real estate litigation over the years, and so I'm a little bit familiar with overburdening easement issues. I'm just not sure it's something that the board can take out, but we certainly will think about it. But it's something that has passed through my own mind about the adequacy of the easement as I've looked at some of the plans that have been presented to us. So you'll have every opportunity to present your memorandum and whatever it is that you want to present to us on that issue. And we will keep an open mind until we have all the information that's presented to us.
Appreciate that. I didn't, the first part of what you were saying got muffled, so I couldn't hear specifically what we were suggesting. Were you talking about a schedule of time when?
A schedule of time for your people to come in.
Okay, and
but
would that
maybe
be?
It's at the end of next week, or maybe it's the following week, depending on how long the peer review people take. And
So,
I assume that we're going to have a number of questions from the public this evening after you finish, Mr. Corcoran. And so I'd like to begin that process as well. I'm sure there's plenty of people that have things to say about this new plan. But I'll take that There's a preliminary set of comments from you. I'll look forward to receiving any written material you submit to the board, and otherwise we'll wait to hear from your experts in due course.
Thank you. I do think it would be difficult for my experts to speak before they have an opportunity to hear the presentation tonight. So I look forward to the opportunity to speak to them.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Do we have other folks that are looking to speak this evening?
I don't see any more panelist hands. We have a couple of attendees. The first one would be Cheryl Tagayas.
Okay, be happy to hear from her.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board and team. Cheryl Tagayas, 660 Canton Avenue. I would like, if I may, through the chair, to suggest that some additional information be provided relative to the amount of fill being proposed, which is the presentation. It was commented that it was being provided both for stormwater and for accessibility. But when I looked at the grading plans, the landscape plans, and the construction management plans, it seemed there were inconsistencies because the number of trees that were being preserved and the buffers that were being suggested would be there seemed to be not as great as what was proposed in the landscape plan due to the amount of grading that's being done. The new grading we know will impact significantly existing trees. The other thing is it's 7 feet high and it's steep. It is pretty steep slope. So what we're going to see around the perimeter of the property from the neighboring properties is nearly a wall 7 feet high of earth and then buildings on top of that. So they might be 1, 2, and 3-story buildings from that proposed grade, but it is already 7 feet above existing grade. And I think what that looks like closer to the property in greater detail needs to be understood so that we can see what the impact on the butters might be. That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Great. And I presumably the one or more of the presenters this evening might be able to address those. Yeah, points that need to be addressed. Anyone else, Bill?
Yes. Kristen Ripa. I'm sorry. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Good evening. Yes.
Oh,
good evening. My name is Kristen Repa. I reside at 654 Canton Avenue, directly across the street from 652. And I would just like to, one of my points, thank you everybody for your presentations this evening. Thank you to the board. One of the details that I made note of was exactly what Cheryl Tagayas had just mentioned, which is the level at which these 2- and 3-story buildings should be starting. I appreciate the shadow tests that were done. However, I believe that something that we would be more concerned about is the stormwater and the impact upon these areas surrounding our property surrounding the building units. I wonder if how many additional test pits have been done since the last meetings that we had in June. I believe that I apologize that I didn't take thorough enough notes in the last meetings that we went through the entire spring, that I don't remember the peer reviewer's name who had mentioned that they felt strongly, perhaps it was Mr. Reardon, that he felt strongly that on a space like this, the first thing that a responsible builder or developer would do would be to investigate the site first and later plan on architecture. And I feel slightly insulted that the developer has spent so much time on working on how the buildings look and the facades and how they look on the outside, and not so much as I believe would need to be presented for what exactly is happening underground and how it will impact the surrounding neighbors. I believe that there is a strong point that Cheryl has made in regards to raising the ground 7 feet and then building on top of it. I understand that there is stormwater drainage. I do appreciate the team's efforts there. I just have a difficult time understanding that that will be the solution for everything. We have a tremendous amount of water in the area. There's a tremendous amount of water here. I live in it, and it needs to be addressed. I think that this is a bigger problem than what they really realize. So that is a main problem for me personally. Another question I would have is just that I believe that the developer, or Mr. Temposi, had a tremendous amount of pride in the beginning of the presentation, providing affordable housing for the community. But my question is, how many exactly units are out of these 124 are actually considered affordable? I don't believe it's really substantial to be so proud of. So I apologize if that comes off as being not so pleasant. But I don't, as much as I do see the downgrade of development that has happened since the initial presentations, I do believe that it's still not significant enough in regards to the downgrading. There are plenty of other notes that I took, but I don't want to take up a tremendous amount of time. I do have young children that I need to get to bed, and I've listened for quite some time. So I know that we have additional weeks to give feedback on. So thank you very much for everybody listening.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Beverly, anyone else?
Yeah, Lara Roche.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that name.
Lara Roche.
Okay,
I
thank
believe
you.
it is. Yeah.
Hi, Lara Roach, 44 Holmes Lane. I have a question, or I don't know if it's a question, but more so I'd like someone to elaborate at some point on this. So the previous engineer, who we all know is quite familiar with the town of Milton, had said a few things during our last round of hearings, one of which saying that we cannot recharge. I believe that at some point they actually said the soils were brutal, and they had a plan that was based on a system that was, I believe, tied into the town drain system. And that was, again, because they couldn't recharge. So now conveniently, we have another engineer saying that we can recharge. So, you know, at some point I'd like someone to elaborate, because I'm not sure what has changed that significantly in the past couple months that now we can and before we couldn't. So, you know, at some point I'd like someone to give us some more information on this, because it seems like two very drastic perspectives, two very different point of views. And I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around how exactly that could be. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, that's a fair question. Jesse, do any other people able to deal with that issue this evening?
I think maybe we could discuss that further at a future hearing, Mr. Chair. I think there's a technical answer to that, and part of it is that Mr. Burke, the previous civil engineer record, never said that it couldn't be done. It was just his recommendation that most of the water be sent off site into the municipal system due to challenges on the site that Mr. Cordero went into. And the current design has new elements that weren't taken into consideration by Mr. Burke in his design. But we'll take a look at that and come up with a comprehensive response to that question. And I think it's a good question, and it deserves a lot of detail and a thorough response.
I mean, I think everyone will agree that the issue of water is one of the sort of predominant and most important issues that relates to this project. And not all of us are scientists or engineers, and some of it is a little bit counterintuitive. So I think the more information and detail we can get, so that people can get some level of comfort that we're not creating some huge mess here, I think is in everybody's interest. So I'll look forward to hearing some more information on that when we regather next week.
Very good. We'll be prepared to provide that.
Great. Bev?
Robin O'Neill.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Robin O'Neill. I live at 30 Holmes Lane. Your presentation tonight had some lovely pictures of the front of my house. I'm the house that sits in the middle of the lane. I have some questions about the landscaping and the buffer zones, and they don't have to necessarily be addressed tonight, but looking at a stockade fence within probably 25 to 30 feet of my house, no matter what's planted in front of it, isn't ideal. I also question some of the native plantings. While it's admirable that you're going that way, you're also putting a lot of units in an area that's already native, already a natural zone with a lot of paving, a lot of roof line. And to say we're trying to do, be aware of, trying to have conservation in mind and so forth. Native plants alone on this site aren't going to make a big development more conducive to the, more friendly to the environment. The lawn space, the roof lines, the water runoff. I mean, I'm glad you're trying to do this, but the landscaping needs to come along a lot. And I worry also about the major trees on the property. What are they going to really be saved? I mean, the town of Milton lost a huge beech tree in front of the library several years ago when a house was moved. And it was, oh, we're going to save it. We're going to save it. Well, construction isn't conducive to large trees, small trees, or, native areas. And so I'd like to see some more, better plans, a little more thoughtful on how you're going to actually make this project not be sitting on top of the neighborhood. Better setbacks, better landscaping. Thank you.
Mr. Schomer, again, maybe that's something those kind of questions is something we could address next week.
Sure. Through the chair, if I may turn it over to Natalie, maybe she has some comments you could make about those questions that Ms. O'Neill had.
That'd be great.
Sure. I think, I feel that I understand the conflict in seeing the property as it stands right now, and then coming in with the development, overlaying it, and it can be very shocking as a neighbor. What we're trying to do as landscape architects is, we're following the 40B development guidelines for the landscape architecture. We're being really cognizant of those edges, and we're trying to be, very careful with those existing trees. And, as we move through and develop the scheme more fully, we'll try to be more careful and add, maybe some more ornamental trees in front of houses that are right there at the line of the development. We can address those comments, as we move through the process. Thank you.
Say one more thing. I'm sorry. It just seems like I've heard you really care about the neighborhood. You really care about this. It seems like what you really care about is putting a 40B project in so that you guys can make a lot of money off the project. I'm sorry. That's the way this feels. It doesn't feel like you really care about the neighborhood, because otherwise I don't think you'd be proposing even this large of a project in this neighborhood. It's going to affect the entire area, and you just don't seem to care. So I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but I mean, we're moving in a better direction, certainly, but you're still basically guaranteeing that a 250-something-year-old house will probably get demolished if and when my husband and I can ever sell it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, if I may, Chairman Hurley, we appreciate that feedback, and Ms. O'Neill's, of course, entitled to her opinion about this project. On the specific point that you raised previously about tree protection, as the plans proceed and get filled in with greater detail, we'll be providing additional details and information about how exactly those trees will be protected. And for Ms. O'Neill, for your benefit, I don't know if you've been following along with the project at 582 Blue Hill Avenue. This is the same landscape architect firm who is working with that project, and they have provided a detailed tree protection plan. And the measures that are used to protect the trees on this site will be similar to those. So that would give you a bit of an advanced look at what you'll be seeing in the future. But just bear in mind that detail will be included in final plans, and is certainly something that we're going to be taking into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bev, anyone else?
No. Mm-mm.
Well,
There is no one. No.
as I said earlier, Judy Barrett was not able to join us tonight, so I don't know exactly.
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Oh, good.
I
Well,
just signed on about 10 minutes ago. Sorry.
nice to see you, even though it's belated. Can you give us a sense of who would be available next week from the peer review group?
Who, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't quite understand your
From the
question.
peer reviewers, who would be available next week?
So, well, we have Sean Reardon doing engineering. We have Cliff Bomer doing architecture as he has for the other projects in town. And Jeff Dirk is going to be doing the traffic review.
Okay. Are they going to prepare something in writing or?
Yes, they will, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if Cliff could join tonight. I will be seeing him tomorrow in another meeting. I'll find out what his schedule is. And I'll check in with Mr. Dirk as well, who may not have quite understood that this hearing was back on tonight. So I'll coordinate with them tomorrow.
Okay, but you have in mind that they would hopefully be available next week?
If they could be available when, Mr. Chair?
Next week for the next hearing.
I'll ask and I'll email you and I'll let you know for sure.
Okay.
I suspect the architect can be available. I'm not sure about Mr. Dirk.
Okay.
I'll find out.
And Judy, I'll be more than ready next week, and I submitted a letter today. So
thank you. I saw that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so hopefully we'll fill the time next week with peer review information.
Yes.
And that's what I would propose to do next week. I expect that perhaps there'll be more additional members of the public, neighbors and residents in Milton who might want to testify. I know Ned Corcoran is going to be continuing to gather and present evidence to the board on a variety of topics.
Yep.
And so, Ned, I would suggest to you that you might be ready as well next week. I'd like to fill the time as best we can, just in case the peer reviewers don't fill the time. Maybe to have some of your people available to testify or whatever it is that you want to present, but we may have some time for you next week.
That's fine. I think in particular, if Mr. Reardon is going to be speaking next week, it might be logical to have John Chesia available for engineering comment as well, and hopefully Scott Horsley. So
I think that's great. I can't guarantee that everyone's going to be heard, but to the extent we can possibly do it, we will. Okay. But I think if we're going to talk about that particular issue, I think having two people deal with it separately, I think is a good idea.
I will check with them.
Okay, and you had indicated that you were going to present some kind of a written memorandum to us relating to the access issue?
Yes,
correct?
And available for follow-up discussion with the board if you deem it appropriate.
Okay, appreciate that. Well, thank you to everyone tonight. I thought the presentations were very helpful.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Cheryl Tagayas has her hand up. I just wanted to acknowledge.
All right, fine.
Not sure we'll be out of time. Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to get clarification on the peer review. Mr. Bomer's peer review is anticipated at what date?
I'm going to speak with him tomorrow, Cheryl, to confirm his availability next week.
Okay. Just, Mr. Chair, it would be helpful for members of the public. I had been inquiring through the planning department if peer review reports had been received as recently as yesterday, I think that I asked, or maybe this morning. And it's a little hard to be prepared for these hearings when the peer review reports are delivered the same day as the hearing and members of the public don't have access to them. So I'd just like that to be kept in mind as we schedule when these discussions will happen.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, it's for the board members, it's not particularly helpful to get those things at the last minute. If we're going to, dig into these issues, it's helpful if we can all have them and read them in advance of the hearing. So hopefully, whatever peer reviewers are going to testify next week, hopefully we can have their information available.
Mr. Chair, if it's helpful, the previous hearing, which is in some part how we've been anticipating the start of this hearing, you scheduled a set of different disciplines for different nights. And we knew about that schedule on the first night. And so it would be helpful if we had sort of a look ahead for the next 3 to 4 weeks as to when you anticipate particular issues to be presented so that we have the right set of peer review and other commenters available.
Well, for next week, I'm hoping that we're going to hear from all of the peer reviewers that have been engaged by Milton. And if maybe as was indicated a moment ago, maybe if we have an engineering person, then we can have presentation by other engineers with respect to the same issue. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to say without knowing people's availability what we're going to do each week. But for the time being, I think next week I'm going to focus on peer reviewers who are going to comment specifically on the subject areas that we've talked about tonight.
I will be able to confirm tomorrow, Mr. Chair, with you by email who is available for next week.
And I can certainly forward a copy of that to you, Mr. Corcoran, so you'll know who's going to be here at least next week.
Sure. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, these hearings are a lot more productive if everyone has an opportunity to prepare and think about the particular issues that are going to be addressed at the public hearing in advance. I mean, that's obvious. That's true for all of us, board members, neighbors, and the like. So the more information we have in advance, the better these hearings will go.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chair, of Mr. Schomer? Jesse, when you filed the updated plans and so forth, did you guys send them to the peer review consultants as well? I'm just not remembering. I think you did. I think you sent them to everybody. Okay.
We sent them to the peer reviewers as well as to Mr. Corcoran for him to distribute to his team as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That's what I thought.
Okay. Anything else before we close this evening's hearing?
Nothing further from us, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you to everyone. Helpful tonight. Hope we get more information next week. I think the more information we get from a variety of sources about this application, the easier it will be for the board to make an informed and intelligent decision. And that's what we're hoping for here. So I'll look forward to hearing from you all next week.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, next Tuesday, 7 p.m.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Good night.